Paul uses the word joy, or one of its derivatives, 17 times in these 4 short chapters of Philippians. And we've seen it in chapters 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to see it again this week in chapter 4. Just to recap, remember that in chapter 1 we talked about developing the habit of happiness. This involves changing your attitude, making it a point to be thankful, and making it a point to be optimistic. You may recall that I talked about this Stanford study and the difference in happy and unhappy people is not life experiences. Because for the most part, we all experience the same types of ups and downs in our lives. Whether it's financial problems or relationship problems or health problems or work problems or whatever it is. The difference between happy people and unhappy people is that happy people tend to face life with a positive, hopeful attitude. Happiness is a habit. In week 2, we talked about taking the road less traveled to happiness, the path of serving others. In chapter 2, we saw that when we do this, we follow the example of Christ, who didn't come to be served, but to serve. So we find happiness through investing in people's lives and sacrificing for the good of others. Happiness is found in sacrificial living. In week 3, we talked about not the pursuit of happiness, but the happiness of pursuit. We're most happy when we live with the knowledge that we're moving in the right direction. Well, what direction is that? Chapter 3 of Philippians emphasized a personal relationship with Christ, and one in which He is the center of our lives and the motivation behind everything that we do. That means that we turn our backs on pride and ego and self-glory. We close the door on the past once and for all, and we put our eyes, focus on Jesus. Forgetting what's behind and straining towards what's ahead, we press on toward the goal of following Jesus. And we learn that it helps a lot if we surround ourselves with like-minded people. And now we arrive at Philippians chapter 4. So let's see what's in store for us tonight. I saw a quote that said, "You can never have too much happy." And I think that's true. I don't think anyone has ever said, "I wish I weren't so happy all the time." Now, I've actually heard people mildly gripe about other blessings. Their wealth, their good looks, their job, their marriage. But no one ever says, "I'm sick and tired of feeling so happy, so positive and optimistic every single day of my life." I guess the only ones who really want to be miserable all the time are country music songwriters. They seem to need it for inspiration. Because I woke up this morning and my wife, my truck, and my dog were all still there, doesn't really sell records. Okay? But country western songwriters, notwithstanding, everybody wants to be happy. And do you know what? Everybody, especially believers, can be happy if they choose to be. Everybody can be happy if they learn to be. The Apostle Paul is a great example. What we see from his example is that happiness or joy isn't really dependent on your external circumstances. Now remember that I mentioned previously that Paul wrote this letter from prison, and yet he was full of joy. And you too can be happy or joyful no matter what you're going through, if you choose to be and if you learn to be. Now, a word that I keep stressing in this series is habit. Happiness is the result of habitually doing, saying, and thinking the right things. Unhappiness is the result of habitually doing, saying, and thinking the wrong things. It's a matter of choice. I've quoted Abraham Lincoln before when he said, "A man is as happy as he makes up his mind to be." So happiness is a habit that you choose to develop. And in this final chapter of Philippians, Paul shows us 4 things that we can do to choose happiness in our daily lives. Here are 4 choices that you can make, and if you make these choices consistently, you will experience a happy life. The first choice you can make in progressing toward happiness is clear up conflict. Paul said in Philippians 4:2, "I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to agree in the Lord." Now let me read this in the contemporary English version. It says it like this: "Euodia and Syntyche, you belong to the Lord, so I beg you to stop arguing with each other." Now apparently, Euodia and Syntyche were at odds with one another. We're not exactly sure what the conflict was, but it was big enough that Paul had heard about it in jail and felt the need to mention these two by name. It was apparently a small enough issue that Paul knew that it could be worked out if only they would make an effort. And that applies to about 99% of our conflicts. They can be worked out if you'll just do it. They can be resolved if you'll just take a step in that direction. Paul tells these ladies to agree with each other, and then he uses the phrase, "in the Lord," to remind them of who they are, who they belong to, and who they're living for. In other words, he's saying, you're Christians, start acting like it. Settle the dispute. And it's sad to say, but most conflicts that I encounter in churches are the result of one party or both parties adopting a blatantly unchristian attitude. I wish it were uncommon, but it's not. So I want to remind you that your life is in the Lord. You belong to Him. You're called to be like Him. That means that you should let go of your conflicts. If you're in a dispute with somebody, take a step toward reconciliation. Now that's real easy to say, but it's not always easy to follow. And I know in my own life that there have been times when I've had a conflict with someone and neither one of us was willing to budge. And you know what? I would imagine all of us have been there at one point or another. We've all gone through seasons when our happiness was destroyed by some squabble that we were having with somebody else. Maybe it was a family member or a spouse or a friend or someone that you go to church with. And 99% of the time, you could probably easily clear it up if only you would. Now, you may be right and the other person may be completely wrong. If you're in a conflict with me, that's probably the case. But there's no point in allowing a little dispute to destroy your happiness. Move toward reconciliation. Solomon said in Proverbs 20, verse 3, "It is honorable for a man to resolve a dispute, but any fool can get himself into a quarrel." You can get rid of a lot of unhappiness in your life if you'll just make an effort to settle your disputes. And here's the second way that you can choose to be happy. Make everything a matter of prayer. Paul said in Philippians 4:6, "Don't worry about anything, But in everything, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. It's hard to be happy when you're worried and anxious about every little thing. The good news is that you don't have to be worried and anxious about every little thing. You don't have to live in a constant state of uncertainty, because we know that God is in control. We know that He has a plan, and we know that nothing will happen that He can't handle. I know people who get stressed out when watching ball games when their team is playing. But have you ever watched a game a second time, especially one that ended the way that you wanted it to? Thanks to YouTube and some sports channels, there are games that you can watch over and over again. And if you've seen the game before, you know what the final score is going to be. So it's really not that stressful. And if your guy fumbles or throws an interception late in the fourth quarter and it looks like the game is on the line, you can sit back and relax. You just take it in stride, because you know that things are going to work out. How many of you remember the show MacGyver? Y'all remember MacGyver? Every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times per episode, MacGyver would get himself into a seemingly unsalvageable situation. And if you were a fan of the show, then you knew how thrilling and dramatic that was. But you also knew that no matter what, he was going to get out of whatever mess he was in. The entertainment was in seeing how he did it. Life is the same way, especially for Christians. Even though we don't know exactly how things are going to work out, and even though things sometimes don't work out the way we want them to, we do have the privilege of putting everything into the hands of our God, knowing that He is in control of every situation and that everything will work out for the best. Paul says that we should pray about everything. If ever there was a verse in the Bible that we should take literally, it should be this one. Pray about everything. I've actually heard believers scoff at that idea. I've heard people say, God has more important things than to worry about my insignificant problems. There are wars and poverty and famine. Why should I bother Him when I'm trying to find a parking spot close to the door? And when I hear that, I want to ask, just how small do you think God is? How limited do you think God is? Now, yes, I realize that there are huge problems in the world, but I also realize that God is greater than our ability to imagine, and that He has the capacity and the willingness to look after each and every one of us, including the smallest details in our lives. That's why in 1 Peter 5:7 it says, cast all your cares upon Him, because He cares for you. We have the privilege of being able to pray about everything. And we have the privilege of knowing that even when things don't go the way that we may want them to go, we can be sure that things will ultimately go the way that they should. That's why Paul said in Romans 8:28, And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. One way that you choose happiness is by choosing to give everything to God and trusting him to take care of the details. Paul said that when you do this, look at verse 7 here in Philippians 4. He says, when you give those things and when you pray about everything, then the peace of God, which surpasses every thought, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And here's a third way that you can choose to be happy. Think good thoughts. Now, I know that sounds pretty simplistic, but it works. I know that from experience. Paul said in Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, and if there is any praise, dwell on these things. Now, as I pointed out before, and as that Stanford study concluded, happy people don't necessarily have better lives than unhappy people. It's that happy people tend to focus on better things. Robert Louis Stevenson, the author of Treasure Island, spent the majority of his life struggling with serious health issues. And in spite of this, he remained eternally optimistic. One day when his fever was running high and he couldn't control his coughing attacks, his wife said to him, I guess you still believe it's a wonderful day. And he replied, yes, I do. I will never permit a row of medicine bottles to block my horizon. Unhappy people always have something blocking their horizon. A health problem, a relationship problem, a financial problem, a failed expectation, and it prevents them from being happy. But the fact is that we all have those things that could get in our way. Any of us could choose to focus on the problem, on the trouble, if we wanted to. But if you want to be happy, develop the habit of thinking good thoughts. Well, how do you do this? Well, Paul said that we should think about whatever is true. Therefore, when you're going through a difficult situation, take a moment to ask yourself, what do I know to be true right now? Well, the answer is that in spite of the circumstances, I know that God loves me. I know that He is with me. I know that He will work things together for my good. And so on. Paul said, think about whatever is right. So make it a habit to ask yourself, what is right in my life? And maybe the answer is, I've got a job, I've got friends, I've got a family, I've got my health, I've got this and I've got that. I'm saying instead of thinking about what is wrong with your life, think about what is right with your life. Paul also said to think about whatever is pure. Not too hard to figure out what that one means, is it? We have a whole lot of opportunities throughout the day to think impure thoughts. And I encourage you to hold yourself to a higher standard, to say, at every opportunity, I'm going to think pure thoughts. When my mind is tempted to wander, I'm going to zero in on thoughts of holiness. On through the list, Paul continues. Think about what is lovely. what is worthy to be admired, what is excellent, what's worthy to be praised. Think about those things. If you want your life to be happy, choose to be happy. Choose to think good thoughts instead of thinking about whatever is wrong or bad or ugly or depressing or vulgar or worthy of criticism. Think about what is good. And here's the fourth way you can choose to be happy. Practice saying, "This is good enough." Now, Paul said in Philippians 4, verses 11 through 13, he said, "I don't say this out of need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know both how to have a little and I know how to have a lot. If any and all circumstances, or in any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need. I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me." Paul was able to accept each and every situation that he faced, knowing that Jesus was right there with him every step of the way, giving him the strength to endure. And you be sure of this: whatever your conditions are today, they're going to change. If you're in the valley right now, there's a mountaintop in your future. If you're on top of the pile right now, there's a valley that's not too far away. It's the roller coaster nature of our existence. We go through ups and downs again and again and again. And you can be happy only when you're at the peak. Then you'll be happy only a very small portion of the time. So I encourage you to take a look at where you are in this moment of time. Examine your life right now and make a choice to say, "This is good enough. I can be happy right here." Now, does that mean that we forget about the idea of bettering ourselves or bettering our situation? Of course not. We're always pressing on toward the prize. But that's the difference between complacency and contentment. Complacency says, "I'll accept what I have and I won't try harder for anything else." Contentment says, even though I haven't reached the finish line and I haven't yet fulfilled all my dreams, I can fully appreciate and fully enjoy this step of the journey right now. So I'm encouraging you to look at your situation with the eyes of contentment. Recognize the presence of God in the details of your life. Accept each day with a sense of gratitude. Face each moment with a sense of assurance, knowing that whether you're facing it is easy or not, you can endure it through Christ who gives you strength. Richard Carlson is a psychologist who worked for many years as a stress consultant. He wrote the book, "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff," and it's all small stuff. He said that one of the most destructive mental tendencies that he's seen in people is that of focusing on what they want rather than what they have. Those who say, "I'll be happy once this desire is met," ultimately just find something new to want, and it delays their happiness forever. Carlson says that there is a way to be happy. Stop focusing on what you want and focus instead on what you have. And that's what Paul's talking about here. He says that whether he has a little or whether he has a lot, it doesn't matter, because he knows that he has what's most important of all, which is the presence of Jesus Christ in his life. And the assurance that Christ's power is going to be there to see him through no matter what. So if you want to be happy, practice saying, this is good enough. Learn to live in the moment. Decide to appreciate all that there is to appreciate in each and every moment of this life. When Paul sat down to write this letter to the church in Philippi, I doubt very seriously whether he was thinking, I'm going to show these folks how to be happy in 4 simple steps. I don't think he said that at all. I don't think he said, and I'm going to mention being joyous 17 times in there, in this letter that I send to them. That's not how Paul approached this letter. Instead, Philippians is just a few pages of Paul pouring out his heart to some people that he loved very much. He couldn't help but talk about joy because his life was defined by joy, even when he was sitting in a prison cell, facing an uncertain future. The lesson that keeps coming back to us in this series is that joy isn't the result of pleasant circumstances, but the result of a pleasant outlook on life. A life of happiness, a life of joy is the result of a habit that you develop and a choice that you make. A choice to be thankful, a choice to serve others, a choice to put Jesus first in your life, a choice to live in the moment. Happiness is a result of the choices that you make. So as we conclude this series, I encourage you to choose a life of happiness. And the great thing is that it can begin right now. At this moment. Forget about yesterday. Don't worry about tomorrow. Take this moment right now to appreciate all that God has given you and all that you have to celebrate. You can be happy. You can be joyful today and every day for the rest of your life. Take out your prayer sheets, if you would.